Millionaire buried pregnant wife. Alive for mistress. But her final message destroyed him in court. The lie was a masterpiece, polished to a diamond gleam. To the world, Lucian Arden was the grieving millionaire, a man shattered by the mysterious disappearance of his pregnant wife, Vivien Hartley. He wept on camera, his voice cracking as he pleaded for her return. But beneath the manicured lawn of their Napa Valley estate, under a lone skeletal oak tree, the truth was beginning to rot. Vivien wasn't missing. She was buried. And in the cold, silent earth, she had left behind a final terrifying message, a seed of vengeance that would grow to choke the life out of the man who had put her there. The air in their Marin County home always smelled of money and lemon verbena. It was a sterile, curated scent that clung to the Italian leather sofas and the vast, empty spaces between Lucian's abstract art pieces. Vivien Hartley, 6 months pregnant and radiant, once found the scent comforting. Now it felt like formaldehyde, preserving a life that was already dead. Lucian Arden was not a man. He was an event. His entrance into a room sucked the air out, replacing it with an electric hum of power and charisma. He'd built his real estate empire, Arden Holdings, from the ground up, crushing competitors with a smile that never quite reached his glacial blue eyes. He was handsome in the severe, sculpted way of a Roman bust, and he treated Vivien with the same proprietary reverence as his most beautiful, most valuable acquisition. "You're glowing, darling," he said, gliding into the kitchen. He kissed her temple, his lips cool and brief. He was already dressed in a bespoke suit, the fabric whispering of obscene expense. Big day today. The final permits for the Vance property came through. The Vance property, 100 acres of pristine, untouched coastline north of Bodega Bay. It was Vivien's inheritance, a legacy from her grandparents, who had been humble sheep ranchers. To Lucian, it wasn't a legacy. It was the crown jewel of his portfolio, a canvas for his most audacious project yet, an ultra-exclusive eco-luxury resort. To Vivien, it was sanctuary. It was the last piece of her unvarnished, pre-Lucian self. "That's wonderful, Lucian," she said, forcing a smile as she stirred her decaf tea. The baby, a boy they'd decided to name Cassian, gave a gentle kick, as if sensing the tremor in her voice. "Wonderful! It's biblical, Vivien," he corrected, his tone light but edged with steel. The power imbalance was a constant, subtle current in their marriage. He wasn't just her husband, he was her benefactor, her guide, her architect of reality. He'd rescued her, as he liked to remind people at dinner parties, from her charming but unambitious life as a landscape architect. He'd given her this gilded cage. "We should drive up this weekend," he continued, pulling blueprints from his briefcase and spreading them across the marble island, covering the gossip magazine she'd been nervously reading. "Walk the perimeter. I want you to see exactly where the main lodge will go. Your input is vital." Her input had never been vital. He'd dismissed her every suggestion to preserve the ancient cypress grove and the native wildflower meadows. His vision was concrete and glass, a monument to himself. Her eyes flickered back to the magazine she'd hidden. The headline was a small, blurry photo. Real estate tycoon Lucian Arden's mystery brunette. The woman was laughing, her head thrown back, her hand resting possessively on Lucian's arm as they left a discreet San Francisco hotel. Vivien's heart had hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd seen a picture like this, or felt the cold knot of suspicion. But this time was different. This time she was carrying his son. "Is something wrong?" Lucian asked, his gaze sharp, analytical. He could read her like a financial report, spotting the slightest downturn. "No, just tired," she lied, her hand instinctively going to her belly. Cassian was breakdancing all night. Lucian's smile returned, but it was a predator's smile. All teeth. No warmth. My boy. He's got my energy. He folded the blueprints with a crisp, final snap. Saturday then, just the two of us. A celebration. As he left, the scent of his cologne, a sharp metallic fragrance called oud infini, lingered in the air, mingling with the lemon verbena. It smelled like a beautiful lie. Vivien looked down at her swollen belly, a profound and terrifying loneliness washing over her. The cage had never felt so small, or the lock so absolute. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the weekend trip to the coast wasn't a celebration. It was a reckoning. Doubt is a patient acid. For months it had been eating away at the foundations of Vivienne's marriage. It started with the late-night meetings, the hushed phone calls he'd take on the terrace, the emotional distance that felt as vast and cold as the space between stars. Lucian was a master of gaslighting. Her suspicions were always dismissed as hormonal anxiety, as insecurity, as a failure on her part to appreciate the pressures he was under. "You're being sensitive, Vivien. It's the pregnancy," he'd say, his voice a soothing balm that was starting to feel like poison. But the photograph in the magazine was not a feeling. It was a fact. She found the woman's name easily enough, Sabine Delacroix, a junior art curator at a gallery Arden Holdings sponsored. Her social media was a curated portfolio of ambition. Gallery openings, charity galas, photos where she posed with an almost desperate glamour. In every shot, she wore a delicate gold locket. The confirmation came 2 days later. Lucian had left his laptop open on his desk, a rare slip in his meticulous routine. On the screen was an email chain with Sabine, the words blurred into a single, searing brand on Vivienne's mind. "She suspects. Be careful," Sabine had written. Lucian's reply was chillingly pragmatic. "Suspecting is not knowing. The Vance property deal is at a critical stage. Everything depends on it. Don't lose your nerve now. Our future is waiting." Our future, not his future, our future. The air left Vivienne's lungs. It was real. The mystery brunette, the lies, the coldness. It was all part of a plan, and it was tied somehow to her land, her inheritance, the last piece of her family she had left. That evening, she confronted him. She did it quietly, without hysterics. Hysterics were for the weak, and she had never felt a colder, harder strength in her life. She simply placed the magazine on the bed between them. "Who is she, Lucian?" He didn't even flinch. He looked at the photo, then at Vivien, his expression one of weary disappointment. "Vivien, we've been over this. I entertain clients. I network. This is part of my job. You know that." "The emails, Lucian. I saw the emails." The mask slipped. For a single, terrifying second, the affable billionaire vanished, and in his place was a creature of pure, predatory rage. His eyes went flat and dead. Then, as quickly as it came, the mask was back. He sighed, running a hand through his perfect hair. "You went through my private laptop?" He made it her fault. The violation was hers, not his. "I can't believe this. After everything I've done for you, for us. There is no trust." He spent the next hour dismantling her reality, piece by piece. Sabine was a troubled young woman who had a professional crush. He was mentoring her. The emails were him trying to let her down gently without causing a scene that could impact the gallery sponsorship. The phrase, "our future," was about the gallery's future, which he was instrumental in securing. It was all plausible. It was all a lie. He was so good at it, so convincing, that for a moment, she almost believed him. She wanted to believe him, but the coldness in his eyes when she'd mentioned the emails, that was the truth. The next day, she called her best friend, Celeste Marchand. Celeste was everything Lucian wasn't. Warm, fiercely loyal, and a brilliant litigator who saw the world in terms of evidence and motive. They met at a small, noisy cafe in Sausalito, a world away from Vivienne's sterile mansion. "He's lying," Celeste said flatly after Vivien recounted the story, her voice trembling. "But a jury would have a hard time seeing past the Lucian Arden charm offensive. What do I do, Cel? I'm trapped. I have the baby coming. He controls all the finances." "You're not trapped," Celeste said, her hand covering Vivienne's. "You're scared. There's a difference. Your prenup is ironclad. He gets nothing from you in a divorce. That's why I wrote it that way. The Vance property is yours and yours alone." A sudden dark thought coalesced in Vivienne's mind. "Unless..." Celeste's eyes narrowed. "Unless what?" There was one clause he insisted on. The calamity clause. I thought it was morbid. "It stipulates that if one of us dies in an accident, the surviving spouse inherits everything, overriding the divorce provisions. But only," she added, her voice barely a whisper, "if we've officially broken ground on a joint development project." The air grew thick. The cheerful clatter of the cafe faded into a dull roar. "The Vance property," Celeste breathed, her face pale. "He just got the final permits. Breaking ground. This weekend." The weekend trip. The celebration. It all clicked into place with the horrifying finality of a coffin lid closing. He wasn't taking her there to show her the view. He was taking her there to make her disappear. "Oh my God, Vivien, you can't go," Celeste said, her voice sharp with alarm. "Call him. Say you're sick. Go to a hospital. We'll file for divorce on Monday morning." "And he'll know," Vivien said, a strange, chilling calm descending over her. "He'll know I'm on to him, and he'll just find another way, another time. He's patient. He's a planner. I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." In that moment, a desperate, defiant plan began to form in her mind. It was a wild, improbable gamble, born of terror and a fierce, primal need to protect her unborn son. She wasn't just a landscape architect. Her specialty was botany. She knew things about the earth, about seeds, about what could endure even in the darkest places. "I have to go, Celeste," she said, her eyes meeting her friend's. "But he's not going to get away with it. I'm going to leave you something, an insurance policy. If I don't call you by 9 p.m. on Saturday, you'll know what to do." She explained her idea, her voice low and urgent. Celeste listened, her expression a mixture of horror and awe at her friend's terrifying bravery. "Vivien, this is insane. It's too dangerous." "Living with him is dangerous," Vivien replied, her hand on her belly. "He thinks I'm just another beautiful thing he owns. He's about to find out that some things can't be owned, and some things, when you bury them, refuse to stay dead." The drive up the coast on Saturday was achingly beautiful, a cruel paradox against the horror brewing inside the climate-controlled silence of Lucien's Mercedes. The Pacific Ocean, a brilliant, churning sapphire, unfurled to their left, while the golden hills of Sonoma rolled by to their right. Lucian was in high spirits, pointing out landmarks and talking animatedly about his vision for the resort. He was playing the part of the excited husband to perfection. Vivien played her part too. She was the placid, agreeable wife, nodding and smiling, her mind a frantic storm of calculation and fear. In her coat pocket, her fingers nervously traced the outline of a small, sealed packet. It contained a few seeds and a tiny, dormant tuber, her last will and testament. They turned off Highway 1 onto a winding, unpaved road. The cell service bars on her phone dwindled from 3 to 2 to 1 and then vanished completely. No service. The words flashed on her screen like a death sentence. "Here we are," Lucian announced, pulling the car to a stop in a clearing overlooking the sea. The spot was magnificent and utterly isolated. A single ancient oak tree stood sentinel on the bluff, its branches twisted into skeletal shapes by the relentless coastal wind. "This is it, darling. The heart of the project. The main lodge will be right here. Imagine waking up to this view." He got out of the car, his movements fluid and confident. He opened her door, offering a hand. His touch was cold. "It's beautiful," Vivienne said, her voice a stranger's. The salty air was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of their life. For a moment, she let herself feel the beauty, a pang of grief for the life she and her son would never have. "I brought a shovel," Lucian said, his voice casual. He walked to the trunk and retrieved a brand-new, gleaming spade. "Thought we could do a little ceremonial groundbreaking. For us. For Cassian." The pretense was so thin now it was translucent. This was it. The blood drained from Vivienne's face. "Lucian, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her resolve. He walked toward her, the shovel held loosely in one hand. The charming smile was gone, replaced by a look of flat, clinical indifference. The real Lucian was finally on display. "I'm securing our future, Vivien," he said calmly. "The one I've worked so hard for. The one you were about to ruin." "The prenup," she whispered. "The prenup," he scoffed. "A ridiculous document. But the calamity clause, that's a work of art. My lawyer is a genius." He stopped a few feet from her. "It's a shame, really. You were perfect, beautiful, well-bred, with the perfect asset. But you started thinking too much, asking questions." Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. "Please, Lucian, the baby, he's your son." "He's a complication," Lucian said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "A loose end. I don't leave loose ends." The first blow wasn't with the shovel. It was with his fist, a swift, brutal strike to her temple that sent her staggering backward. The world exploded in a flash of white, then swam back into a dizzying gray focus. She fell to her knees, the impact jarring her whole body. She could taste blood. He stood over her, the shovel now held like a weapon. "I did love you, in my own way," he said, as if delivering a eulogy. "I loved the idea of you." And then he began. He wasn't a frenzied killer. He was methodical, efficient, like he was digging a foundation for a building. The thud of the spade hitting the soft, damp earth was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat of her last moments on earth. He dug for what felt like an eternity, the hole growing deeper and darker at the foot of the old oak tree. Vivienne lay on the ground, her mind a flickering candle in a hurricane of pain and terror. Celeste. The seeds, 9 p.m. The thought was her only anchor. She had to do it. While his back was turned, heaving another shovelful of dirt, she acted. Her movements were clumsy, slick with mud and tears. With trembling fingers, she ripped open the packet from her pocket. She couldn't see the seeds in the fading light, but she could feel them. She clawed at the freshly turned soil beside her, a few feet from the edge of the pit he was digging for her. She pushed the tuber and the seeds into the earth, pressing the mud over them with the palm of her hand. A prayer, a curse, a final act of defiance, a mother planting a garden for her son's avenger. Lucian turned back, his face streaked with sweat. He saw the smear of mud on her hand. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Still fighting, I'll give you that." He grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron, and dragged her to the edge of the shallow grave. She didn't scream. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze filled with a mixture of terror and a strange, cold pity. He would never understand what she had just done. He was blind to the power of things that grow in the dark. "Goodbye, Vivien," he said, and then he pushed her. She landed hard, the fall knocking the wind from her. Above her, the sky was a canvas of bruised purple and orange. The first shovelful of dirt hit her chest. It was heavy, cold, and smelled of worms and decay. It was the smell of the end. She didn't close her eyes. She watched him, his silhouette working against the dying sun, until the darkness covered his face. Her last conscious thought was not of fear, but of a strange, black flower, unfurling its bat-like petals in the silent, waiting earth. Lucian Arden returned to Marin County just before 10 p.m. He didn't race back. He drove at the speed limit, a man with nothing to hide. He stopped for gas, paying with a credit card, and bought a coffee, making polite small talk with the cashier. He was building his timeline, brick by meticulous brick. When he walked into his silent, empty house, the first thing he did was call Vivienne's phone. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. "Darling, it's me." His voice was a masterpiece of loving concern. "Getting worried. You said you were just going for a short walk to clear your head. Call me back as soon as you get this. I love you." He called again 20 minutes later, then again. Each time, his feigned panic grew. At 11:30 p.m., he made the call he'd been planning all day. He dialed 911. My wife is missing," he cried, his voice expertly breaking. "She's pregnant. We were up at our property near Bodega Bay. She went for a walk hours ago and hasn't come back. It's dark and cold, please. You have to find her." The performance was flawless. By the time the first sheriff's deputies arrived at his mansion, Lucian was the picture of a man undone by terror. He was pale, disheveled. He'd made sure to rumple his hair and splash water on his face, and his story was simple and devastatingly plausible. "She's been emotional lately," he told the officers, dabbing at his eyes. "The hormones, you know. We had a small disagreement. Nothing serious, just about the nursery colors. She said she needed some air. I stayed with the car. I never should have let her go alone." The next morning, the search began in earnest. Helicopters chopped the air above the Vance property. Search and rescue teams with dogs combed the Golden Hills and coastal bluffs. Lucian was there, a tragic figure in a North Face jacket, pointing out the path Vivien had supposedly taken. He directed them away from the lone oak tree toward a treacherous cliffside trail. "She loved the cliffs," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "She said she felt free there." It was a subtle, brilliant suggestion. She might have fallen. A tragic accident. Detective Alaric Rowe of the Sonoma County Sheriff's Office arrived on the scene mid-morning. Rowe was a man in his late 50s with weary eyes that had seen every flavor of human depravity. He was quiet, observant, and had a built-in lie detector that hummed whenever he was near a sociopath. As he watched Lucian Arden give a heart-wrenching interview to a local news crew, Rowe's detector wasn't just humming, it was screaming. Lucian's grief was too polished, his narrative too neat. Rowe had interviewed hundreds of distraught family members. Their grief was messy, chaotic, full of contradictions and memory lapses. Lucian's was a press release. "Find anything?" Rowe asked one of his deputies, a young, earnest cop named Miller. "Nothing yet, sir," Miller replied. "The dogs lost the scent near the cliff trail. Husband seems to think she might have slipped. It's a straight drop to the rocks below." "The husband," Rowe said, his eyes still fixed on Lucian. "He's holding up well." "He's a rock," Miller said with admiration. "Can't imagine what he's going through." Rowe grunted. He ambled over to Lucian, who was now conferring with the search and rescue leader. "Mr. Arden," Rowe said, his voice flat. "Detective Rowe, just a few questions for our report." Lucian turned, his face a mask of exhausted cooperation. "Of course, Detective. Anything to help find my Vivien. When your wife went for her walk, you stayed at the car. For how long?" "Hours," Lucian said, shaking his head sadly. 3, maybe 4. I was reviewing some architectural plans on my laptop. I lost track of time. It's a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my life." "And you didn't go looking for her yourself?" "I did," Lucian insisted, a flash of indignation in his eyes. "I called her name. I walked a little ways down the path she took, but I didn't want to leave the car unlocked with my laptop, and I honestly thought she'd be back any minute." It was a perfect, reasonable explanation for his inaction. Later that day, Rowe got the preliminary report on Lucian's alibi. His phone records showed him in Marin County until late morning. The gas station attendant confirmed seeing him around 9:30 p.m. Then there was the mistress, Sabine Delacroix. She was brought in for routine questioning. She was nervous, tearful, but her story was solid. She claimed she was at her apartment in San Francisco all day Saturday, working on a gallery proposal. She'd spoken to Lucian briefly that evening. He'd called her, frantic about his missing wife. She was the concerned friend, nothing more. Days turned into a week. The search was officially scaled back. Vivien Hartley was now a missing person, presumed to be the victim of a tragic accident. The news cycle moved on. Lucian Arden, the heartbroken millionaire, retreated from the public eye to grieve in private. The perfect crime. Rowe sat in his office late one night, staring at the case file. A photo of a smiling, pregnant Vivien looked up at him. Something was fundamentally wrong. People like Lucian Arden, people who controlled every aspect of their world, didn't just lose track of time while their pregnant wife wandered off toward a cliff. He pulled up the case notes. One thing stuck out. A statement from Vivienne's best friend, a lawyer named Celeste Marchand. She had called the station the first night, frantic, almost hysterical. She'd claimed Lucian was responsible, that Vivien was afraid of him. At the time, it was dismissed as the emotional outburst of a grieving friend. But Rowe read it again. Check the prenup. Check the calamity clause. He just got the permits. He took her there to kill her. She told me she was going to leave a message. A message. What the hell did that mean? Rowe had pressed Marchand on it, but she had no details, just a frantic insistence that Vivien was too smart to just disappear. The case was going cold. There was no body, no weapon, no forensic evidence. There was just a grieving husband with a perfect alibi and the gut feeling of a weary old detective. Rowe stared at Vivienne's picture. A message, he muttered to the empty room. Where did you leave it, Vivien? The world moved on, but Celeste Marchand did not. For 6 months, she lived in a fog of grief and impotent rage. She watched Lucian Arden emerge from his seclusion, a somber but resilient figure, praised in business magazines for his strength in the face of tragedy. He was overseeing the initial surveying of the Vance property, his eco-luxury resort now framed as a tribute to his beloved, nature-loving wife. The hypocrisy was a physical sickness in Celeste's stomach. She replayed her last conversation with Vivien 1,000 times. I'm going to leave you something. An insurance policy. If I don't call you by 9 p.m. on Saturday, you'll know what to do. But what was she supposed to do? She had screamed at the police, told them everything. They had looked at her with pity, as if she were a hysterical woman unhinged by grief. Detective Rowe had been the only one who seemed to listen. But without evidence, his hands were tied. Celeste's law office became a shrine to the cold case. Maps of the Vance property were pinned to the walls. She read and reread the police reports, Lucian's statements, the geological surveys of the land. Nothing. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, she was packing away some of Vivienne's personal effects that Lucian had grudgingly allowed her to collect from the house. She found a box of Vivienne's old books from her landscape architecture days. They were filled with pressed flowers and handwritten notes in the margins. Vivien had been obsessed with botany, particularly with the language of flowers, the Victorian tradition of assigning meanings to different plants. It had been a game between them. A white hyacinth for loveliness, a yellow carnation for disdain. Celeste idly flipped through a well-worn copy of The Compendium of Obscure Flora. A page was dog-eared. The entry was for Tacca chantrieri, the black bat flower. Celeste stared at the illustration. It was a bizarre, Gothic-looking plant. Its flowers were a deep, bruised purple, almost black, with long trailing bracts that resembled whiskers and 2 large wing-like bracts that looked like a bat in flight. It was native to the tropical forests of Southeast Asia. Beneath the illustration, Vivien had scribbled a note in the margin in her elegant script. The face of darkness, a thing of beauty that thrives in the gloom, a perfect symbol for a beautiful lie. A chill went down Celeste's spine. The face of darkness. A beautiful lie. It was a perfect description of Lucian Arden, but it was the next line in the book's description that made her drop the book. Habitat. Thrives in well-drained but consistently moist, humus-rich soil. Cannot tolerate direct sunlight or frost. Utterly unsuited for the exposed, salt-sprayed, sun-drenched coastal climate of Northern California. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. A conversation from years ago. Vivien, laughing, had shown her a picture of the flower. "Isn't it deliciously morbid?" she'd said. "My favorite. But I could never grow it here. It would be like trying to plant an orchid in the desert. It would die instantly, unless you buried the tuber deep enough to protect it from the sun, and gave it a very specific kind of fertilizer." Celeste's heart began to pound against her ribs. Humus-rich soil, a very specific kind of fertilizer, a decomposing body. "I'm going to leave you something." It wasn't a note. It wasn't an object. It was a seed. A plant. A living thing that could not possibly exist on that property naturally. It was a botanical anomaly. A silent, growing witness. Her hands shaking, Celeste grabbed her phone and called the one person who had listened. "Detective Rowe," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of horror and dawning, terrible hope. "It's Celeste Marchand. I know what the message is. I know where to look." She explained her theory. The black bat flower. The impossibility of its survival there. The conversation about burying the tuber. At first, Rowe was silent on the other end of the line. It sounded insane. A clue from beyond the grave, delivered by a flower. "Ms. Marchand?" he finally said, his voice cautious. "That's a long shot." "Detective, Vivien was the most brilliant botanist I ever knew," Celeste insisted, her voice rising. "She knew that land better than Lucian ever will. She knew its soil composition, its sun exposure. Planting this flower there would be like leaving a signed confession. It's a deliberate, biological impossibility. You said yourself you thought something was off. This is it. You have to look near the only place that provides enough shade on that bluff. The big oak tree." There was another long pause. Rowe was thinking of the case file, the perfect alibi, the lack of evidence, and the nagging feeling that he was missing something right in front of him. This was crazy, but it was also the only thing they had. "The oak tree," he said slowly. "Okay, Ms. Marchand. I'll see what I can do." It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. For the first time in 6 months, Celeste felt a flicker of something other than despair. She felt the cold, hard resolve of Vivien herself. The seed had been planted. Now it was time for it to break the surface. Getting the warrant was a bureaucratic nightmare. A botanical anomaly theory from a grieving best friend wasn't exactly probable cause, but Detective Rowe was persistent. He leaned on his reputation, called in favors, and framed it as a final, exhaustive search to close the book on the tragic Vivien Hartley case. He emphasized the one shady spot on the bluff, the oak tree, as a location that hadn't been thoroughly searched by the dogs, who were drawn to the more obvious cliffside path suggested by Lucian. Reluctantly, a judge signed off. Rowe assembled a small, discreet team, a forensic anthropologist, 2 of his most trusted deputies, and a botanist from UC Berkeley that Celeste had recommended. He didn't want a media circus. He wanted answers. They arrived at the Vance property on a gray, overcast morning. The beauty of the place now seemed menacing. The lone oak tree stood on the bluff, its twisted branches like arthritic fingers pointing to the sky. As they approached, the botanist, a mild-mannered man named Dr. Aris Moreau, stopped dead. He knelt, pulling a magnifying glass from his pocket. He wasn't looking at the base of the tree, but a few yards away, in a small patch of weeds. "Well, I'll be," he breathed. "What is it?" Rowe asked, his pulse quickening. It's dead, of course. The frost would have killed the top growth months ago, Dr. Moreau said, gently parting the weeds. But this is unmistakable. He pointed to a withered, blackened stalk and a single decayed leaf. This is the remnant of a Taca chantrieri, the black bat flower. Your friend was right. It has absolutely no business being here. It's like finding a polar bear in the Sahara. A heavy silence fell over the team. The impossible had become possible. Okay, Rowe said, his voice grim. This is now a potential crime scene. Let's start here. The team began the painstaking work of excavating the area around the dead plant. The digging was slow, methodical. Every shovelful of earth was sifted and examined. Hours crawled by. The sun began its descent, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. Doubt began to creep back in. Maybe it was just the plant, one of the deputies muttered. Maybe she just dropped it. Keep digging, Rowe ordered, his eyes fixed on the deepening patch of earth. And then they found it. The shovel made a dull, soft thud. Not against rock, but against something else. The forensic anthropologist knelt, trading the shovel for a delicate trowel and brushes. He worked with reverent slowness, scraping away the layers of damp soil. First, a scrap of fabric appeared, the sleeve of a wool coat. Then, the pale, delicate curve of bone. A hand. Her fingers were curled, as if still trying to claw her way toward the sun. And just beneath her hand, nestled in the dark, enriched soil, was the source. A small, dark tuber. The root of the black bat flower. She hadn't just planted it. She had died protecting it. Her own body providing the very conditions it needed to briefly, defiantly live. A wave of profound sadness and awe washed over Rowe. He'd seen hundreds of bodies, but never one that spoke so clearly. Vivien Hartley hadn't just been a victim. She had been the first and most important witness to her own murder. The excavation continued into the night under the cold glare of portable floodlights. They unearthed Vivienne's body, and with it, the small, fragile skeleton of her unborn son, Cassian. Rowe looked at the shallow grave, at the oak tree standing silent guard, at the impossible flower that had bloomed and died. He pulled out his phone. The first person he called wasn't his captain. It was Celeste Marchand. "We found her, Celeste," he said, his voice heavy. "You were right, we found her." He could hear a choked sob on the other end of the line, a sound of unbearable grief and terrible vindication. The next call was to dispatch. "I need a warrant for the immediate arrest of Lucian Arden. The charge is murder." The arrest of Lucian Arden was a media firestorm. The story of the millionaire who buried his pregnant wife alive was sensational. A gothic horror story set against the backdrop of California's elite. Lucian, ever the performer, maintained his innocence with practiced outrage. He was being framed, he claimed, by a vindictive best friend and overzealous police, his grief twisted into a monstrous lie. The trial, held 6 months later, was the most anticipated legal drama in the state. The prosecution, led by a sharp, no-nonsense district attorney named D.A. Renata Valles, built their case around a single, powerful narrative. The tale of two Lucians. There was Lucian, the public figure, charming, grieving, philanthropic. And then there was Lucian, the private monster, a manipulative, narcissistic killer motivated by greed. Celeste Marchand was their star witness. On the stand, she was composed, her voice clear and steady, despite the tears that threatened. She recounted her final conversation with Vivien, the fear in her friend's voice, the chilling accuracy of her prediction. "Vivien knew he was going to kill her," Celeste said, her eyes locking with Lucien's across the courtroom. He stared back, his expression a mask of cold fury. And she knew no one would believe her, so she left a message she knew only I would understand. She used her greatest passion, the study of life, to testify about her own death. The defense attorney, a high-priced shark named Everett Langford, was relentless. He painted Celeste as an obsessed, unstable woman, projecting her own fantasies onto a tragic accident. "Ms. Marchand, isn't it true that you were in love with your best friend's husband?" Langford sneered. "That's disgusting," Celeste shot back, her composure cracking for a second. "Isn't it true you were jealous of their life? And when this tragedy occurred, you concocted this botanical fairy tale to destroy the man you couldn't have?" "I concocted nothing," Celeste said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Vivien did, from her own grave." The testimony of Dr. Moreau, the botanist, was dry, scientific, and devastating for the defense. He explained to the jury, in simple terms, the absolute impossibility of the Taka chantrieri growing naturally on that bluff. He called it a botanical fingerprint, left at the scene. The prosecution then laid out the motive, the calamity clause. They produced the prenup, the development permits for the Vance property, and financial records showing Arden Holdings was more leveraged than Lucian had let on. He didn't just want the Vance property. He needed it. Vivien, alive and potentially divorcing him, was a liability. Vivien, dead, was a 10-figure windfall. The turning point came with the testimony of Sabine Delacroix, the mistress. The prosecution offered her a plea deal, testimony in exchange for a lesser charge of conspiracy. She took it. On the stand, she was a shadow of the glamorous woman from the gossip pages. She was terrified, her hands trembling. Velez was gentle at first. "Ms. Delacroix, what did Lucian Arden promise you?" "Everything," Sabine whispered. "A future. He said Vivien was emotionally unstable, that their marriage was over. He said after the divorce, we could be together." "But they didn't get a divorce, did they?" "No," Sabine sobbed. He told me he had found a cleaner solution, a permanent one. He said he was going to take her to the property, to handle it." "And what was your role in this solution?" Velez pressed. "My role was to be his alibi," she admitted, not looking at the jury, at Lucian, at anyone. "I was to say I was home all day. He called me that night, told me it was done, and told me exactly what to say if the police asked." Lucian's lawyer tore into her on cross-examination, portraying her as a scorned lover, a liar trying to save her own skin by turning on the man who had rejected her. But the damage was done. The jury had seen her terror, and it was genuine. Throughout it all, Lucian Arden remained eerily calm. He watched the proceedings with a detached curiosity, as if observing a business deal. He was confident, arrogant, certain that his wealth and power would insulate him from the grubby reality of this courtroom. He still believed he had committed the perfect crime. He had forgotten about one last detail, one final message from his wife. "The prosecution calls its final witness to the stand," D.A. Velez announced, her voice ringing with grim finality. "We call Vivien Hartley." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection! This is a grotesque theatrical stunt." "It is no stunt, Your Honor," Velez said calmly, holding up a sleek silver tablet. "We are presenting evidence discovered as a direct result of the primary clue in this case." The judge, intrigued, overruled the objection. The destruction of Lucian Arden began not with a bang, but with a password. Celeste, working with Rowe, had spent weeks trying to access Vivienne's cloud-based journal. It was protected by a password Vivien had never shared. But after the discovery of the body, Celeste had a horrifying epiphany. She sat with the tablet, her fingers hovering over the screen, a thing of beauty that thrives in the gloom, a perfect symbol for a beautiful lie. She typed in the password, Takachantrieri. Access granted. The journal was Vivienne's true final message. Hundreds of entries, dating back 2 years, meticulously documenting Lucien's escalating campaign of emotional abuse and control. She wrote about his gaslighting, his subtle threats, his coldness. She wrote about her discovery of his affair with Sabine, And in the final chilling entries, she wrote about her fear. De Valles projected the journal entries onto the large screens in the courtroom. The words, in Vivienne's own elegant font, filled the silent room. Entry date: October 12th. Lucian was on the phone with his lawyers again. I heard him mention the calamity clause. He laughed. It was the coldest sound I've ever heard. He thinks I don't understand what he's planning. He thinks I'm just the pretty, fragile wife. Entry date: October 15th. He told me today that the permits for the Vance property are approved. He wants to go up on Saturday for a celebration. The look in his eye. It wasn't celebratory. It was proprietary. The way he looks at a building he's about to demolish to make way for a new one. I think I am that building. Final entry. Written the morning of her murder. This may be the last thing I ever write. If you are reading this, Celeste, it means my insurance policy worked. The flower led you here. I am so scared, but I will not let him erase me. He wants my land, my future, my son. He cannot have them. The password is the name of the ugliest, most beautiful flower we ever talked about. It is the key to my truth. Tell my story, and tell my son, wherever he may be, that his mother fought for him until the very end. The courtroom was utterly silent, save for the sound of a juror openly weeping. Every eye was on Lucian Arden, and for the first time, the mask shattered. The cool, detached confidence evaporated, replaced by a raw, snarling fury. His face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. This was the creature Vivien had seen in her final moments. "Lies!" he screamed, lunging to his feet, his voice a guttural roar. "All of it! Fabricated lies!" His own lawyer tried to restrain him, but Lucian shoved him away. His eyes, burning with a psychopath's rage, were fixed on Celeste. You did this!" The outburst was his confession. In that moment, the jury saw him not as the charming millionaire, but as the monster from the pages of his dead wife's journal. They saw the man who could beat a pregnant woman and bury her in the cold earth without a flicker of remorse. The bailiff swarmed him, wrestling him back into his seat as he continued to curse and rave. But it was too late. He had destroyed himself. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. The foreman stood, his face grim, and refused to look at the defendant. On the charge of the murder of Vivien Hartley, we, the jury, find the defendant, Lucian Arden, guilty. A pause. On the charge of the murder of baby boy Cassian Hartley, we find the defendant, guilty. A strangled sob broke from Celeste. Lucian Arden sat stone-faced, the mask of indifference back on, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the table. He had been so close. He had planned everything perfectly. He had accounted for everything except the ingenuity of his victim and the enduring power of a single, well-placed seed. Vivien Hartley, from 6 feet under the ground, had just sent her husband to prison for the rest of his life. The silence that followed the verdict was a heavy, weighted blanket. Lucian Arden was led away in chains, his handsome face a blank slate. He would die in a maximum security prison, a world of concrete and steel, a fitting end for a man who saw life as something to be developed and demolished. Sabine Delacroix, her deal honored, was released on probation. She vanished from the art scene, from San Francisco, from the life she had been so desperate to attain. Rumors occasionally surfaced of a haunted-looking woman working as a waitress in a drab Midwest town, a woman who never made eye contact and flinched at loud noises. She had her freedom, but she was sentenced to a lifetime of being haunted by the ghost of the woman whose life she had helped destroy. For Detective Rowe, the case was a career capstone. It reaffirmed his belief that no crime is truly perfect, and that the truth, like Vivienne's flower, has a way of pushing through the darkest soil. He retired a year later, finally at peace, knowing he had delivered justice for Vivien and Cassian. The true redemption arc, however, belonged to Celeste Marchand. The trial had taken everything out of her, but it had also forged her grief into a weapon for good. she inherited the role of executor of Vivienne's estate. Her first act was to tear up Lucian's plans for the eco-luxury resort. In its place, with the full weight of Vivienne's fortune behind her, she established the Vivien and Cassian Vance Foundation. The pristine 100 acres of coastline were turned into a public nature preserve, a sanctuary open to everyone. But the foundation's primary mission was to combat domestic violence. It funded shelters, provided legal aid for victims of abuse, and developed educational programs to help people spot the signs of coercive control. The polished lies and subtle power plays that Lucian had mastered. A year after the trial, on a clear, wind-swept day, Celeste walked to the top of the bluff on the Vance property. The police tape was long gone. The scar in the earth where the grave had been was now covered in native poppies and lupine. She stood before a simple, elegant stone bench that had been installed at the foot of the ancient oak tree. The inscription read, "Vivien Vance Hartley and Cassian Hartley. The seeds you plant today will be the shade you sit in tomorrow." Celeste placed a small bouquet on the bench. It contained no dark, Gothic flowers. It was a simple, vibrant bunch of white hyacinths. For loveliness. For a life that had been brutally cut short, but whose legacy of courage, love, and defiance would now grow and blossom for generations to come. The beautiful lie was dead. The beautiful truth was just beginning to bloom. Vivienne's story is a harrowing reminder that truth can be buried, but it rarely stays dead. It shows us that courage can bloom in the darkest of places, and that even the smallest voice or the most silent message can rise to bring down an empire built on lies. Her fight for justice, carried on by her fiercely loyal friend, proves that the bonds of love are stronger than any gilded cage. What did you think of Vivienne's incredible bravery and her ingenious final message? Do you believe justice was fully served for all the characters? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who appreciates a powerful story of resilience, and be sure to subscribe for more true-life dramas that will stay with you long after you've finished watching. Thank you for being with us.